Hey, good afternoon and welcome to Semenes's fourth colloquium series out of 7 this fall. I'd like to welcome today's guest expert speakers, Dr. Natalie Koch. And for our public audience joining us, just a quick brief introduction to the session today. We're here at the Center for Middle East and North African Studies at the International Institute at the University of Michigan. The study of the Middle Eastern and North African region has been taking place at this university since as early as 1889. Our programmatic study of the region began in 1961, and our center has recently celebrated its 60th anniversary a couple of years ago. So the University of Michigan has been committed to the study of the area, its languages, cultures, politics, histories, religions, for quite some time. And one of the important traditions of this the center is that as a national resource center of the U.S. Department of Education, we also engage in public education. This is a unique colloquium because we have students from undergraduate, master's, and doctoral programs from across disciplines who are interested in this region broadly and specifically based on their interests. And it provides us a unique opportunity to investigate and explore a theme. This year's theme is higher education and reformation across the Middle East and North Africa, a geopolitical exploration. We are meeting 7 times this semester. And this week's theme and today's session's theme is the context of higher education in the context of nationalism and globalization. Our co-sponsor for today's talks is the School of Education's Center for the Study of Higher and Post-Secondary Education. And today's scheduled talks include Dr. Natalie Koch from the Heidelberg University in Germany, whose presentation today is entitled Nationalism and the Geopolitics of Higher Education in the Arabian Peninsula. Professor Koch is a professor in human geography at Heidelberg University in Germany. She is a political geographer who works on geopolitics, authoritarianism, and state power in hydrocarbon-rich countries, primarily in the Arabian Peninsula. She's the editor of the new book, Spatializing Authoritarianism, with Syracuse University Press 2022, and her second monograph, Arid Empire, The Entangled Fates of Arizona and Arabia, to be published by Verso in 2023, examines the role of the University of Arizona in the US as empire building domestically and overseas, focusing on how the arid land's expertise were essential in establishing settler control of the desert Southwest, how this was built through ties with the Arabian Peninsula since the 1800s. She's extending her research on the politics of US higher education abroad. Her next project will focus on the wider history of US science diplomacy in the Gulf region. So we're very lucky to have our expert today bridging expertise on nationalism, scientific advancement, and state power, connecting both histories and phenomenon both from domestic empire building to international colonial experiences. We also had scheduled Alex Shams from the University of Chicago to present the project, If Not for the Revolution, Gender, Politics, and Social Change in Iranian Higher Education since 1979. Unfortunately, Alex Shams had to cancel due to illness. So we will provide our attention to Dr. Koch in full today. We're lucky to have this presentation on nationalism and the geopolitics of higher education in the Arabian Peninsula. Our framework for these 2-hour sessions is in 3 parts. We'll start with 20 to 30 minutes approximately prepared remarks from our experts today. We will then turn for question and answer time, both from our student audience, our live audience in the classroom, as well as our public audience online, and I'll moderate that session, bringing in questions submitted online and in person in our classroom. Then we'll take a 5-minute break and reconvene for a more intimate closed-door conversations with students enrolled in the course related to this colloquium to engage with our scholar, to discuss their research, how they came to this area of work, to this profession, their experiences in the higher education space, and also talk about the work to come, and so both exploring the disciplinary work and the social life around it. So let us begin. Dr. Koch, the floor is yours. Please go ahead. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Thank you for the kind introduction. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Sound is good. Okay, excellent. Yeah, so thank you again. I sort of feel sorry that I'm not presenting on the new project. I chose to focus on something a little bit more contemporary, but I'm more than happy to talk all about the Arizona connections in the Gulf, and much of that is the story of the University of Arizona. But for now, I will talk a bit more about the recent projects in the Gulf countries in promoting elite higher education, which is actually what got me started on that Arizona project that I sort of fell into by chance. So maybe I can say a few more words about that a little bit later. I mean, as a discipline, my home is geography. That said, I've always felt myself to be a scholar of two major topics, nationalism and authoritarianism. And in a lot of the literature on nationalism, you see sort of debates about which part of nation building is most successful, or in the case of the quote here on the bottom of the slide from Ernst Gellner, that there's a kind of comparison of which tool is more important. So he writes that the monopoly of legitimate education is now more important, more central than the monopoly of legitimate violence. I think what is so fascinating to me about nationalism, and what always fuels my continued interest in it, is the sheer diversity of it. That in fact, I don't know that now, whenever now is, that he's speaking from 40 years ago, but education has always been really an important part of the national identity project. And so this interest that I have had in nationalism is really what led me to be thinking about these questions in the Arabian Peninsula. So clicking into the next slide. Right. So the scene of higher education is in the Arabian Peninsula is something that you actually see across a lot of similarities across the world. That there's this large push in a number of different places to quote unquote domesticate elite higher education. So as Western universities and Western higher ed has become hegemonic, there's a desire from leaders in various countries to actually develop their own institutions that can either compete with Western elite institutions, or that they can at least collaborate with them. So across the world, and certainly across the Arabian Peninsula, you've seen this proliferation of private universities, with a large number of them being branch campuses or partnering with international institutions. And in a lot of cases, they might not be a branch campus, but an American style university, as in the Gulf, you have the American University of Dubai, American University of Sharjah, the American University in Ras Al Khaimah. There's lots of different American universities and again, that's a common theme that you see across the world. And in all of these places, you have this sort of yeah, the sense of competition where many education leaders and government leaders are focused on exactly the rankings of their universities. And this has become a marker of international prestige, of modernity, and of a sort of competitive edge that is supposed to then be the reference point for future development and future investment and a positive developing future. So in the Gulf, you have all of these sorts of things, these bigger identity projects of bringing this elite education tied to young people, these these lovely young men who I met at National Day celebrations, that these futures are something that is being imagined and mapped onto their bodies. In a lot of ways, I think it's important to understand them as geopolitical subjects. They are geopolitical subjects in the sense of, yeah, the way that they choose and make decisions about education, the way that they're brought into this global system of higher education, which is part of the broader education system that we all exist in. But just to give a quick overview or introduction to the places where I primarily am working, these are just a few. The examples are from the few countries that are sort of highlighted in a deeper beige or pink, I don't know, whatever color that is, where you have a wide range of these, as I mentioned before, American University or other branch campuses from the United States. So this has really been a trend that picked up in the mid 2000s, so around 2007, but even before that, you had, for example, American University of Sharjah there from 1997, and some even earlier. So this investment in American and American-style higher education has been increasing, and American universities are not the only ones that are operating in the Gulf countries. There's British ones, there's French branch campuses, there's German institutions. There's a wide range of them, but overall, I would say the American universities tend to be on this sort of imagined hierarchy of the top universities, and so they have largely been sought after. For the brand actually also really matters. This is something that may not be very transparent in our understanding of how these universities tend to move over and set up these branch campuses, but there's a lot of money that goes into this, and the institutions within the Gulf countries that are trying to recruit these branch campuses, they really are vying for the top names. So a colleague who's worked for Tamkeen, which is the UAE institution that basically controls the NYU Abu Dhabi project, told me at one point that the Emirati government wanted Harvard, but they couldn't get Harvard, and so they settled for NYU. So yeah, the brand was something that was really, really important in positioning these places. But at the same time, you've had a lot of this focus, and there's been plenty of media coverage of these American branch campuses and foreign branch campuses. There's also been this huge investment in national universities. So across the region, many of these institutions have received substantial amounts of funding, increased to levels that had been relatively unknown. So I think it's easy to forget that these institutions are also growing, they're also significant, and in many cases, they're also hiring and paying the faculty from Europe and from America and then from other places around the world. So these are national universities. They they label themselves as such, but they're also increasingly international, and they're also increasingly focused on international rankings. So yeah, again, here there's too many examples to talk about. So in this presentation, I'm just going to focus on two countries, on Saudi Arabia and Qatar, but I will sort of set the stage here. In all of these countries, in the Arabian Peninsula, okay, minus Yemen, because yeah, we always subtract Yemen in these conversations, I suppose, mired as it is in war at the moment. But in the GCC countries, there's been this big push to promoting a post-oil future, and there's lots of reasons for that I won't bore you all with right now. But across the region, they have leaders have recognized that there needs to be some kind of plan, some kind of agenda for when the oil runs out. The knowledge-based economy discourse has been quite strong and sort of touched the region in lots of ways and through plenty of different institutions, consulting companies. The RAND Corporation had a really impactful report to this effect. But overall, this idea of building a knowledge-based economy in the Gulf is, as so many other places, it's a nationalist project. It's framed around building the nation, of making a more prosperous nation, of creating a national future, of creating a future for young people in this imagined sort of apocalyptic scenario where there's no more oil and there's no more revenue. So this idea of a kind of utopian aspirational future coexists with this dystopian apocalyptic future of resource exploitation and nothing left. So to overcome that, the idea of the knowledge-based economy narrative in the Gulf countries is focused on the sort of national pride. Another piece of that, I should just sort of caveat here, this chart is quite old, but these numbers are very difficult to find, so I'm just leaving it with whatever it might be. But generally, when we think about the number of non-citizens in the region, you have a very large percentage of the population are not citizens. So as part of this nationalist story about the knowledge-based economy is this idea that the Gulf countries need to eventually get rid of or imagine a future without this large number of expats. And so the knowledge-based economy and the sort of post-oil future narratives are all tied to these broader agendas of Qatarization or Emiratization or Saudization of the workforce. And doing so is part of what they hope to achieve with these broader education initiatives. And this sort of dual nature of the investment in big national branch campuses and international higher education goes together with the investment in national universities across the region. And I think that this sort of reflects the broader nature of nationalism, which people sort of scholars often talk about as the Janus-faced or Janus-faced nature of nationalism, that there's sort of this face that is looking backwards or forward, or there's always a sort of double-sided nature of nationalism. I think in addition to that, this metaphor is often used with reference to the way that nationalisms often look back to that glorified traditional past, and then forward to this imagined wonderful nationalist future. Here, I want to talk about the way that nationalism is two-sided in the way that different scripts tend to focus on a foreign audience and a domestic audience more or less. And when I say scripts, I mean nationalisms have all sorts of scripts. scripts. In the US context, obviously, I think that the best, easiest example that I often give is the idea of U.S. nationalism as being based in the melting pot idea of a cosmopolitan, multi-ethnic, multi-religious society. There's sort of that version of the proper American nationalism. And then there's another nationalism story within the U.S. that the US is a white Christian nation, and they're very different, right? Like they're very different strands, but they still tap into the tropes of the nation. They use a lot of the same symbology. They use a lot of the same sort of aspirational discourses. So this is what I mean when we have two different types of scripts. So when looking at the higher education sector and investments in the Gulf, you see that sort of dual nature in the scripts about modernizing and seeking international prestige and a kind of Western defined modernity. And those scripts tend to be oriented toward foreign audiences or to certain parts of the national community that want to be cosmopolitan and profess a cosmopolitan international identity. On the other side, then, you have the scripts about higher education and its future in the Gulf, where they're tied more toward they're targeted more toward a domestic audience. And here you have the focus then is much more strongly on local values and traditions and preserving those traditions. So this is a kind of dual nature of nationalism in the region. I won't say too much about this, but about higher education in the Gulf, in most countries, you have a divided population where some people, some members of the community really believe in promoting this sort of Western type education, and others really believe in the more traditional type of education. Sometimes they conflict, but not necessarily. Sometimes they just exist in parallel, and sometimes they draw resources and images and symbols and ideas from one another. So like all nationalisms, they sort of coexist, commingle, and sometimes they come in direct opposition. Right, so with that background, just a few case studies here to consider. The first one, which I'll be rather brief on, is the case of Saudi Arabia. So here, what I want to do is just sort of talk about two different types of institutions that you see in Saudi. And one is exemplified by KAUST, which is sort of more the outward focused orientation in the framing of the university, and the other is Princess Noor University. Did I? Yes, that's right. Okay. So just to give you a sense of KAUST has been framed as this ultra-modern university built on a sort of greenfield site, meaning there was nothing there before, and focusing on science and technology. It was Saudi Arabia's first mixed gender institution, so that's really something quite remarkable. As you can see from their statement about their sort of qualities, is that they aim to attract talent from across the kingdom, but also worldwide. And if anybody has ever seen some of their hiring notices, you know that they are often hiring and they're paying foreigners a lot of money to be recruited as a top talent there. And this is all sort of moving toward this idea of excellence that, as you can see here, again, this idea of global benchmarks for performance. This is not saying Western, right? I think we can tend to read that into it, right? That global often here is just used to, it is equated with Western. But that's the sort of excellence that's being defined here. But at the same time that this is a sort of global project, it is still supposed to be rooted in Saudi society and economic development, and that it works to sort of bring together that international talent and leverage that with the overall nationalist agenda of development in Saudi Arabia. So KAUST, I think, is one of the better examples of an institution in Saudi Arabia that has this explicit international orientation. But at the same time, here you do have some of those nationalist scripts of Saudi development that it's rooted in Saudi society, and that's something that is seen as quite important. A second case to that then in Saudi is Princess Noor University, which is in Riyadh. And here you have a much stronger sense perhaps of the nationalist story. So Princess Noor University, it's an all women's university, and I mean the campus is just it's astonishing. It's massive. Once you get inside of the compound walls, it's all women and only women. There's a driverless train that takes you around where, well, yeah, the women weren't driving. So for so long, that a driverless train made that possible to preserve this as a female-only space. And it really, I mean, it really is remarkable to experience that kind of space in a university setting. So with that sort of gender segregation, and you also have this element of other sort of narratives about Saudi identity and the idea that the university should be promoting faith of royalty to God and then country, and that this sort of generation that should be coming through the walls and the rooms of this university, that they stick to identity and national system. So this is explicitly saying we are trying to educate good national subjects here, and that these women should be carrying out their duties in life as wife, mother, scientist, worker, all of the things that will come her way. And here, the last 2 points of this sort of mission statement list are focused on the knowledge economy, right? And here, again, we have this focus on development for the future, of contributing to the national cause of promoting Saudi excellence into the future. I won't read those. So another example of this sort of contrast where it's not in the Saudi case, it's not like they're exclusively one or the other, right? One sits more on one end of the spectrum than the other, and a similar dynamic is seen in Qatar. And the two cases I'll look at are Qatar University and Education City. That is, yeah, the Cotter Foundation project there. So Qatar University is a fascinating place. The architecturally already you can see that it has it doesn't sort of aspire to this standard Western gleaming spectacle, but it feels like a different kind of space. It feels that it has a national spirit in it. So these are some more pictures, my own pictures actually from different views of the campus. And in contrast to many of the flashy parts of Doha, you can see the Doha, like the downtown skyline in the very back here of the top picture. And this is a distinct space within Qatar, where it is low rise. It feels like it has a more traditional spirit. It's also just a rather ordinary place. There's, normal things that we would expect to have in any campus. And one of the other important elements to this is that it is still gender segregated. So many other universities in the UAE and Qatar are increasingly integrating the genders, but not at Qatar University. And this happens in lots of different ways. So there will be like completely different faculties in some places, like duplicate faculties in one place versus another, but also in the library. So I don't remember which was on top and which was on the bottom, but basically at the library you had exact copies of one versus the other, just gender segregated spaces. So in this way, you can also sort of see the tradition is being built into the physical space of the university. And there's a lot more sort of national displays around campus than you might see in other places. All the sort of references to the past and to the Emir and the Father Emir that are decorating the halls in places that in ways that you wouldn't necessarily see in some of the international branch campuses. So this is a very deliberate sort of reference to those nationalist ideas that you have, the sort of the national subject as a subject that is absorbing these messages through the visual as much as a sort of mission statement. Cotter Foundation's Education City project is a rather different case, and I know that you guys will have later in the semester Neha Vora, who's a colleague I've worked with quite a bit in Cotter Foundation and elsewhere. And this is a very different project from Qatar University. The focus here is on bringing international branch campuses, and by the way, that's that sort of cube building is the Qatar Foundation headquarters. So there's a lot of different international universities that are cited on at the Education City compound. So you've got Texas A&M, Virginia Commonwealth, Northwestern, Georgetown, etc. And in these places, you have this kind of the architectural representations here are also they try for a bit of a Qatari flair, I suppose, in some way, but there's a much more sort of modern, standard Western approach to what these buildings look like, and a profuse use of greenery, as you can see. I've been very interested in this bigger question, also the sort of aspirational Western idealization of green space, and that's something that is. Yeah, it hasn't been wholly imported to the region, but it's something that the green lawns, for example, are something that is a very sort of stereotypical space of an American university. So here it kind of serves as that referent against what you could see, for example, here in the landscape architecture of Cotter Foundation, or of Cotter University. The other notable aspect in a lot of ways about the Cotter Foundation's Education City complex is that they've really tried to focus on the theme of sustainability and promoting that in, I must say, mostly symbolic ways, having solar panels, bikes renting services and charging stations. These are wind turbines on the bottom left there, and a sort of metro tram system that to move people. So in this way, you also have this idea that the campus is a place that is looking toward international conversations about sustainability and environmental futures, and this is something that is quite unique to those in the Qatari community, the international community, who are very much tapped into discourses about sustainability. So it's very much on display at Education City, but it would not necessarily be so obvious in other parts of the city. And then they also have this lovely farmers market in Education City, where there again you can see how people are learning to perform themselves, not just as good national subjects, but good environmental subjects, and environmentally aware in today's dominant world order is something that is sort of held up as an exemplary feature of a modern individual. If you care about the climate, if you care about your vegetables and how they are sourced, or if you're eating vegan, this is sort of a marker for that identity. So even where you have this opportunity to promote that kind of citizenship, the environmental citizenship, it's also taking place in Education City. The other, I think, notable thing about well, I suppose it's all of Education City, is that each of the structures on the campus is an architectural icon in a lot of ways. But one of the newest additions to that is the library, which is, I mean, it's really quite remarkable, designed by Rem Koolhaas, a massive project and huge amounts of money going into this. And so, yes, the library, when I've visited, it's been very well used and a very active place, but it's also an iconic site that can circulate, and the visual aesthetic side of it is very Western, and that's a kind of that's an important message that is sort of a Qatari version of this Western modernity in the library space. And incidentally, I was just in Finland a couple of weeks ago, and in Helsinki they just opened so I think maybe 6 or 7 years ago, a very large national library next to the Helsinki train station, which I could have told you it was the same designer. It wasn't, but it looked very similar. So in that way, you have this sort of airy Scandinavian feel inside as well. In that picture on the bottom here, you could see the mosque in Education City. So it's just going back to, I didn't actually comment on this. There's the mosque at Qatar University, a rather more traditional looking mosque for Qatar, whereas in Education City, they have this very fancy, really, really spectacular and beautiful mosque where there's a clear message about this being a kind of Qatari version on Western modernity in a lot of ways through the architectural design. And the very fact that this is cited on Education City was not uncontroversial. Well, it was controversial, certainly, that there wasn't a mosque there for quite some years of the project. And so this was sort of that melding again of the international and the national values in an institution like Cotter Foundation's Education City project. And of course, all eyes and all news outlets, I suppose, in one way or another, seem to be focused on World Cup at the moment, with it just getting going. Education City has also been home to one of the major stadiums for the games. So I don't have too much to say about this because I'm not going, and I will only get to go in February because I couldn't get tickets and I couldn't get into the event. But in any case, I think I would keep an eye on what is happening, what the conversations are about the FIFA World Cup, simply because the siting of the stadium is not accidental. There's obviously the idea that the stadium could then be used for future sporting events at the university, there aren't really big sports teams there. So maybe not. But in any case, beyond the future use story, this becomes then a really important way for the leaders to say, look, and connect this story of where the stadium is, where the game is being played. Look, we have this massive investment in elite higher education, international higher education. US universities are here. I haven't heard this story, but I can guarantee you it's going to play out on our screens very soon, because that's part of what these projects do. These large international ones, they are a way to project a positive story about education and the sort of modern development, and citing then the Stadium for World Cup in Education City is an important part of that bigger project, projecting that international story about Qatari modernity and the sort of Qatari vision for being a future oriented and progressive, in whatever way you want to understand that, place to admire. Which sort of comes back to the dual nature of these discourses surrounding these institutions, and the bigger question of what makes Gulf higher education geopolitical. Well, frankly, I say everything can be geopolitical. I think everything is geopolitical, but just looking at these two different kinds of scripts, where you do have the foreign audiences that are being addressed in these development initiatives, and you also have the domestic audiences being addressed. And as I said before, these mix in both of the countries that I gave as examples here. And so, I did not do my timing thing right here. So in a way, you have this sort of fact that nationalist scripts are always bordering practices, and bordering practices are geopolitical. How are boundaries drawn between us and them? How is global space imagined and as divided and compartmentalized? These sorts of bordering practices are all key to understanding how and why these investments in education are happening in the way that they are. The other major theme here I think is important to address is the very fact that higher education across the world continues to be defined by the sort of hegemonic Western idea of modernity. And so in a way that these institutions are trying to domesticate elite education, they're already entering this terrain of Western hegemony. And in that sense, by trying to vie to get this sort of elite status, they're also then vying for those Western credentials. And the last point here that Neha Vora talks about in her book, and that I've also talked about in my forthcoming book, Arid Empire, is that it is the Western experts, and specifically white Western experts, and their bodies in particular, are still granted this sort of primacy as adjudicators of what quality education means, who teaches in the classroom, who envisions those projects, who implements that. And so, as I said before, even where you have these huge investments in domestic education, when leaders try to promote that as quote unquote elite, they tend to want more white bodies and foreign bodies as people who are participating in this project. And in this sense, it is geopolitical. This is about different parts of the world becoming connected, and also at the same time reinscribing new borders between us and them, and past and present, and tradition and modernity. So with that, I would say thank you. I hope I didn't go too long, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for those prepared remarks. For those of you who are signing in online from the public audience, please make use of the Q&A tool on Zoom and submit your questions, and I'll draw them into the discussion. But we have some time now to get into questions about the presentation that we've just seen. Sheila?
Hi, my name is Shakila Hay. I'm a first-year master's student in international and regional studies, and my specialization is the Middle East and North Africa. So I just wanted to ask, we talked a little bit about the duality of nationalism in the Arabian Peninsula and how it affects or conforms with higher education. So I'm wondering what type of educational legislation by the government is put in place there to promote either side of nationalism. Like, does the government play any role to kind of carry out that agenda for either more local oriented nationalism or more like global outreach nationalism ideals?
Are you asking specifically about education legislation, or just in general, the different legislative aspects that would relate to nationalism?
Just legislation aspects that affect higher education.
Higher education. Okay. Yeah. I should say I'm not an expert on that. So I can guarantee you there's plenty of it. So that's a big part of what got me interested in this project in the very beginning was actually my research. I used to work in Kazakhstan. And when I was working there, the government developed this brand new university that was called Nazarbayev University for the first president dictator of Kazakhstan. And the way that they made this an elite Western university was by setting it outside of the normal rules of like the normal legal code for education. So it was sort of given this exceptional status, and that sort of treatment of the university as this enclave, in a sense, a legal enclave. That was what fascinated me and got me interested in studying the case of Kazakhstan so many years ago. So this is not an answer to the Gulf case, but I know that there's a mixed type of legal mechanisms where you would have a different set of rules that apply to the international branch campuses versus the domestic national campuses. So I think when you have your guest Nehavora come, I know that she knows much more about this, about the contracting rules at Education City, because she's had to deal with some of those things. So I would definitely suggest asking her about that, because yes, there are differences, but I don't know the nuts and bolts of it, unfortunately.
Hi, I'm Nina. I'm a junior here at the University of Michigan. I'm an international studies and Middle East studies student. I'm really curious if you have any thoughts on whether the long-term goal is to reduce the reliance on these branch campuses in favor of domestic universities that are staffed and led by domestically educated students instead of bringing in foreign nationals to teach. And I know that's like something that's asking you to predict the future, but if you have any thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the real question is, who is the decision maker? Who wants to promote one agenda versus the other? And here, as I said, there's these competing scripts. And within the ruling family in Qatar, for example, the Al Thani family, you do have people who do not like the Qatar Foundation Education City project at all. If you ask them, they would kill it, because they don't think it's appropriate that foreigners are there and coming and educating. There's all sorts of contention and resentment about it. Those dissenting voices, they're not in power. Like, they don't have the sort of sway domestically to push back against that. Rather, the ones who really are a force, in the case of Cotter Foundation, I mean, it's been led by the mother of the current emir, Sheikha Moza is how she's commonly referred to. She has been a major proponent of women's education, of internationalization, and really pushing that. And because of her special role for many years as the wife of the emir and now the mother of the emir, she has that sway within the community to push back against anybody who would say no, get rid of the foreigners, because I think that recognition in that sort of more cosmopolitan branch is recognizing that's something good and that they want to promote that. So I would be surprised if they ever just tried to completely remove the Western faculty. The other point here that I would just sort of add as a footnote, not because I've seen this happening in Qatar, but in the NYU Abu Dhabi campus in the UAE, they are trying at times to hire Emiratis as faculty members. This is not something that the Western faculty members are very supportive of. Like, frankly, there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of really bad behavior, but there's resentment amongst the white Western European colleagues at NYU Abu Dhabi. And so in that case, if they have a position of power within the institution, they can do things that make it difficult for those Emiratis to succeed. And so then it just looks like, oh, they just all flunk out. So if that resentment sort of translates in a similar way in these institutions, and they want to keep the institutions alive, just substituting large numbers of the locals, of the Qataris, the Emiratis, the Saudis, across the board. I mean, I've seen this in so many different sectors, whether it's energy or law or education, where the idea of forcing national citizens into the institution is just met with huge opposition and resistance, and in a lot of ways I would sort of sabotage, and it's not a trajectory that is going to lead to a successful institutional operation in the future.
I have a fantastic question from our online audience. This is from Badr, who is a PhD candidate in architecture at the University of Michigan. There's a two-part question. So the first part of the question is, what do you think about the HBKU as a project? I believe it refers to the Hamad University in Qatar. Don't you think that it begins to dismantle the QU EduCity binary? So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, would you describe spaces like Houst and in Saudi Arabia and EduCity in Qatar as Potemkin villages, even Frankensteins or Pinocchios? So you can engage with those two-part questions, however you like. I can repeat them.
Yeah. So first of all, HBKU. Yeah, there's a lot of politics about this, and much of that has to do with the transition of power between the current emir, so Sheikh Tamim, and his father. So the father and the husband of Sheikh Moza, they were much more internationally focused than the son. Actually, the son has been a bit more in the conservative side of things, and not as happy to have the international influence. So in and around this sort of transition, you had a pushback against some of the Western institutions and a desire to bring more local traditional institutions into the Cotter Foundation Education City project. HBKU was sort of its rise within Education City was part of that. So it, yeah, with there's so many layers to how this has unfolded that I don't know that I really want to go into all the details of this. But essentially, this university was supposed to be an umbrella for the whole project. Then it wasn't, and then it was. So that now, as far as I know, that institution is really only focused on Islamic theology and those sort of Islamic related disciplines.
Are you talking about HBKU?
Yeah. Whereas all the other institutions at Education City, they tended to have one focus or another. So Texas A&M engineering, Northwestern journalism, Georgetown politics and international foreign, like diplomacy. So HBKU was then sort of given this Islamic orientation, Islam studies, and theology. So yes, it's sort of changed the orientation in some ways, but I wouldn't say it's really the effort to raise its place in the bigger structure hasn't meant a major transformation of that. But as we saw with all of these cases, there's this intermingling. It's just that Qatar University may exist on one pole, and Education City may exist on another pole, but they're not diametrically opposed. And then the other question was the question about the sort of Frankenstein structures. Was it specifically about the architecture?
The question is phrased, would you describe spaces like KAUST and EduCity as Potemkin villages, even Frankenstein or Pinocchio's? Badr is a PhD candidate in architecture, so perhaps that's some context for how he's using the concept.
Yeah. I mean, I don't like any of those cliches. I don't think that they're ever useful for a lot of reasons. But the main thing is that even if it seems like there's no there is a there. These are real structures, real people built them, they stand, they do something. I mean, I have been to cities in Central Asia and in Myanmar and Naypyidaw, where there's nothing behind the facade. Like there's literally just a building, no one goes to it. These institutions are real existing things. If we take this sort of Western notion of a functional structure and we assume that it should do the things that it set out to do, a library is a library. Yeah, but libraries they're places for people to go to, like, get their news and check their email. It's places for families to do a million different things. They're always mixed uses. So in a way, you could take that same sort of narrative about a Frankenstein structure and apply it to anything. I don't think that the Gulf is exceptional in that way at all. And yeah, for that sort of Potemkin thing, I also don't think that's the case. I haven't been back to Princess Noor for many years, so I don't know what their library looks like right now. That would be the closest I would say to an empty facade with nothing inside. When I went to the library, it was massive. It was absolutely huge, but there were no books in it. I was told that the books were coming. I don't know if they arrived. I'm assuming they would have arrived by now. But in all of these cases, yeah, there's really activity happening at them. This is not just some sort of window dressing.
Thank you very much.
You're right. They might not need books, but they had plans to. There were empty bookshelves, which suggests that there was a plan. There was all sorts of machinery to collect the books when they came. There just were no books. So, right. Theoretically, maybe they don't need books.
We have perhaps time for one or two more questions, and I might slip one in there. Any other questions from the group before I jump in? Go ahead.
Hi, Professor. I'm Zhang Yang, a first-year graduate student in the MIRS program, specialized in Middle Eastern and North African region. And my question is that in your presentation, you mentioned that how universities kind of raised a controversial debate over the modernity and its Islamic nationality when you're comparing to like one mosque between a one modernity architecture in the campus. So my question is that how does these universities, as well as the royal families, strike a balance between their Islamic nature, the loyalty to the royal family, and how they strike this balance with the ongoing modernization of higher education, like in any spheres, in the universities, in architectures, or in like how they set the disciplines for their students, how they strike the balance.
So I missed I think an important part of that. You said the ongoing marginalization of higher education. Was that what you said?
Modernization. Yeah.
Oh, modernization. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah. So they do that in lots of different ways. I think that the broader narratives in the Gulf countries is that this is a kind of modern Islam, and just as with any nationalism, there's always multiple scripts, multiple competing scripts. With religious identity, it's the same thing. There's multiple competing scripts about what is a proper Islam. So in that, then the question becomes, who has the discursive power to define that? So here again, I think you have to look at who's behind the projects, and there it becomes then important, and you start to understand that it is a particular type of story about Islam and about the national identity and how those two come together, which is open to sort of science and research, and including in fact women in science and research, just finding appropriate ways to do that. So a colleague of ours in Doha has written about medical education in Qatar. So there was a sort of contest, or not like an overt contest, but a sense of discomfort about how do you teach medicine to women, and how do you teach them about the human body and do all these dissections and other things like that. So those became uncomfortable topics because they were always being read through the lens of Islam and gender norms and all of those sorts of things. So they found workarounds. They've made it work, and they've developed quite well established medical programs in both Qatar University and in education cities. So they've been just in quite open to the way that that education can serve the religious and the national identity, rather than seeing it as something that is opposed. I hope you heard me. I don't know, my microphone cut out there for a minute, but hopefully it came through.
There was some adjustment in the audio,
okay.
But we were able to hear everything.
Okay.
Well, Professor Koch, thank you so much for engaging in this public Q&A session. We're going to go ahead and conclude the public discussion portion, take a 5-minute break, and then reconvene for the closed doors roundtable conversation with the students in the class. So thank you very much. And for those of you who joined online, we appreciate your engagement and your questions. Have a wonderful day.